My tools are typically frameworks and thought leadership. People, process, then technology, and always in that order fundamentally.
Welcome to the Disgruntled PM podcast, your weekly therapy session for the chaotic world of project management, transforming daily frustrations into real action. Welcome, everybody. I'm Trevor, the Disgruntled PM, joined today by my special guest, Eddie Dunn. Now, Eddie is a close friend and also has a lot of knowledge in a very specific area of expertise, and that is organization development. Now, we'll go over what that is and kind of what he's learned over his career, both from the military as well as working with multiple major civilian corporations, and how he incorporates these practices and techniques throughout his career. Eddie, let's get started with, why don't you introduce yourself to the audience?
Well, first and foremost, Trevor, thank you for having me. I'm absolutely thrilled to be here. And it's a rare treat to be able to talk about OD and OL and OE and all these things over the years. It's very rare that people actually want to talk about that, but I'm happy to do that. It's almost like you have a 69 Camaro and you're lifting up the hood to see inside the engine, right? So it's kind of a fun topic for me that doesn't get rarely asked about. So I love talking about this topic, but I have been in the OD, OE, well, I mean, organizational development, organizational effectiveness, and OL as it's basically known. Fundamentally from that construct, it's just about all systems design work. So that's the way I've kind of thought about this. I started way back when in the day, way back when I was working as an HR manager, and I started thinking through my career moves. I was freshly out of the military. I was using my GI Bill, and I was doing a lot of different things at the time. But I fell into this role when I was in corporate security. And I can tell you that story and how I got into that if you want to talk about that. But fundamentally, I started in the pharmaceutical industry. I evolved from an HR manager. I was very fortunate to get that role. And then I started discovering OD work and how it just illuminated everything in me. And I found my core purpose in life. So I've built world-class everywhere I've gone because it's a craft, right? And so you have to really begin to not only inculcate the design concepts that are built around that, but also go out there and operationalize the things that you build over time to see how it works. It's almost like being this like backyard mechanic, right? You get in there, you build it, you soup it up, and then you run it out there to see how it goes. And that's what you do with organizations. How do you enable the type of growth that requires infrastructure builds and what that means over time? So the course of my entire career has been around this HR talent management OD work, project-based, working primarily where I cut my teeth is in mostly in the pharmaceutical industry. I did some stints in banking, healthcare, and then I actually have been in the military transition space over the last 15 years building world-class as well. So that's just a brief introduction. I also have a degree in this. I went to this little Christian college, NIAC, up here in New York, and I got an organizational management degree. I've used the hell out of that degree over the course of time. But over the course of my career, I've continued to sharpen everything there is to know about system design and where we are now, especially with AI, and we can certainly get into that. But that's just a very brief view and overview of where I've been in my career.
Well, you're giving me hope because I'm supposed to be wrapping up my master's in OD in May of.
Outstanding. Yeah.
So it's really a treat to have a skilled practitioner as yourself to talk to about this, because as I'm learning these techniques, you've lived them.
Yes.
I'm really happy you explained the abbreviations in the beginning, because that's one of my standing rules on the show is
Yes.
no abbreviation is said without an explanation of what it means.
Yes.
Because OD, organization development, means different things to different people.
That's right.
And OD as a term can mean multiple things without context.
That's right. And, you know, it's actually, this whole field is evolving now too, because if I can just take 30 seconds and tell you what I mean by that. So OD, OE, OL is beginning to evolve in such a way is that I believe because of the transformations in the workplace that are happening because of AI, the future is going to be super bright for those system design folks who know how to bring what I believe to be the HI, the human intelligence, to the equation. So what's going on now? And there are some very dynamic shifts occurring in real time as AI is impacting how we do business. And that there's an automation and commoditization that are occurring in real time that need to be factored into anyone who's going to be in this field because organizations of the future are going to look very different in the next 2 to 3 years, or maybe even sooner, based on what I'm seeing AI doing in the space. So that's just a little bit of a little bit of a thumbnail sketch of what I'm seeing ultimately.
So for a lot of the audience, they're majority project managers, and
Mm,
Six Sigma is kind of a big thing in our world as project managers.
mhm.
How is that? How are you or are you incorporating Six Sigma methodologies into OD or OD practices as you evolve organizations?
Yeah, I don't have this. I don't have the Six Sigma certifications, but I do have a PhD in life and everything around that. So I've employed a lot of their principles. I primarily lean on a lot of the stuff that I have been built and I've actually learned. Change management is a key aspect of how I think through a key area. So strategic management, change management, right? Organizational design work on how things move and processes. There's some military influence on task condition standard processes that I've pulled in. So as a subject matter expert, I've kind of built my own toolboxes and how I do things, not taking anything away from Lean Six Sigma at all. I think that's a great way to go. And I think it's a legitimacy and credibility to have. But some people say, well, what's a PhD? It's just piled higher and deeper, right? PhD. So but in the practical execution, I'm one of those types who have the years of experience of trying stuff, building it. This tool really works well. I'm going to take that tool, put that in my toolbox. And I've collected a lot of tools over the year that have been built into here, but I know they work because they're built into here. So there's some tried and true constructs that I've used over the course of time that have enabled the world class that I've built, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. I mean, I have coined what I call Trevorisms, where there's certain things that I've
Hmm.
just started saying and I constantly find myself repeating them.
Yeah.
And one of the things I always tell people is as a PM or as any professional, you build your toolbox based off your expertise of experience and learning for the certifications, learning for the tests.
Hmm.
But having, in my garage, I've got a giant toolbox with thousands of dollars worth of tools.
Hmm.
But the power doesn't come in having all those tools and knowing which one to use. Sometimes it's knowing which ones not to use versus knowing
Exactly.
what you need to use, because sometimes, you've got to sometimes I've got, those little nails with the head on them, the finish nails. I've got a tool that I use that it's like a little spring mounted thing that
Hmm.
knocks those in. Use a hammer, you'll bend them.
That's right.
So it's the idea of not necessarily knowing what tool you need to use, and I think that's a perfect metaphor for OD, because OD doesn't, when you walk into an organization, you're not walking in there thinking this is the practice this is what I'm going to implement.
That's right.
You observe, and it's almost by process of elimination to figure out what you need to do rather than observing and going, "Oh, this theory would work perfectly for this."
Yeah, I mean, if I can build on that for a second. So anytime
Please.
I take on a project base, so say for instance, there's an OD project that a client wants from me, and there's a unique factor for every organization. Every organization wants to feel warm and fuzzy because Eddie, you don't understand our business. Let me
Mhm.
tell you how different our business is. But ultimately, the businesses are very much the same. But you want to make them feel like, okay, yeah, they are unique, but that always starts out in the assessment phase and the data collection, the analysis, right? And those are project management skills that need to be there anyways, right? So you pull out that tool set. All right. So you begin to do the analytics around the data collection, the confidentiality clauses, the NDAs, all the multiple hoops you have to jump through to make sure you assess based on the data and the story of the organization and where they want to go next. That assessment phase is super critical. Can you use a lean canvas, for example, to really articulate a one pager for the senior executive C suites? You have to know how to have that experience under your belt to be able to articulate that value. So when you're doing those kinds of things, it's, 25 years plus experience of being in this to understand how to apply the right pressure at the right place at the right time. Lean canvas, I use it all the time, because unless you can articulate full value one page without having voluminous pages of stuff, right, and to be able to cleanly articulate it to make sure the value proposition is there, you don't really have a plan in place. When you have the one pager and the lean canvas in place and you have your set processes, then you can voluminously build out your project management, use all your Gantt charts that you want, set your task conditions and standard, bringing in that military piece so you have the rigor and discipline. All of that is absolutely essential, but it starts with strategy. It starts with the assessment pieces that need to be there so you know how to target and get over the target with precision.
Yeah, and to your point about that one pager, the executive summary that you start out with,
Mm.
that's a crucial tool in any project you're working on. And one thing I think you left out that I'm going to assume you do is it's written to the audience, meaning it's written to the tone of of the receiver that you're hired
Yes.
by.
Yes. Underneath that is what I call a stakeholder analysis, right?
Yeah.
And the stakeholder analysis is multifaceted. And this is where the value of a really good OD consultant knows how to look at a constituency. Because after the analysis is done, you have to build comms plan for each level of audience. So when you're talking to the C-suite level, it's not going to be the same conversation with those who are operationalizing the core concepts in the areas that need to be done. For example, you may have to be on an IT project that has a legacy system that needs to be retired and pulled away. Well, you have to understand what kind of data does it have in it. Do you have everything in cybersecurity aligned? Are the policies in place? All these things that need to be not only checked off from a project management perspective, but do the people on the ground understand the execution of what needs to get done? That means 3 bullet points for the C suite, right? In terms of what that communication, yes, legacy, new piece. Here are your decision points that you need to make sure it's approved. And we're adequately resourced to execute. Those are key stakeholder pieces that need to be understood and timed out throughout the course of a project. So those are the things that are extraordinarily important. So I will tell you, when I was on an SAP project years ago, and the change management key aspect of that was super critical in a global formation of a multi-billion dollar corporation that was implementing SAP for the first time. And that's where I cut my teeth on a lot of my OD work, right? And it was really extraordinary opportunity to really build in value that understood how to get this project across, this $50 million SAP project across the finish line. So lots of good experiences here and how to get it all done.
Yeah, and one thing that I think that a lot of people don't realize when they go in for change management and change and working on implementing big changes across a company is the messaging that this is going to make us better is great. But
Mhm.
when we implement these new systems or new processes, you're going to feel the pain of taking 3 steps backwards in the beginning.
Mhm.
And then you've got to learn the new system. And then eventually you'll see your return on investment by understanding how it works.
Yeah, there's a very one of my tools that I pull out is that I always use. It's a framework, right? And my tools are typically frameworks and thought leadership. People, process, then technology, and always in that order fundamentally. Why do I say that? Because one, I've got, and remember, a piled higher and deeper PhD of 25 plus years of experience. And I'll tell you where this really comes true. So you have to be able to assess your people piece. Do you have the right horses, right resource to be able to do it? Do you have the right processes from the people who are going to enable that process? And do you have a technology in place to amplify, accelerate, and enhance the people process pieces? If you can do that in the right construct order, then the utility of your technology implementation will be that much more effective. And this is how you get it from, this is another arbiter or an indicator of when you think through, How do you know your change management plan actually worked? It's the lack of organizational noise post implementation. The less noise there is in the system, the better the implementation was. It's a really interesting place. It's the absence of noise. So, for instance, if you screw up an implementation of a technology investment in organization, especially a huge Fortune 500, and you get nothing but organizational noise, all kinds of stuff, customer dissatisfaction, utility and customer interfaces are horrible, and there's all kinds of systematic problems starting to flourish and pop up. That means your people processes were horrible and there's a disconnect in the system. And then I brought into projects where I have to rewire the whole thing in order to create the level of less organizational noise that says, yep, we not only did it, but there's less organizational noise and we're humming as an organization as a result. That's 25 years of experience that will tell you how to do this the right way.
You just gave me the visual of the Grinch sitting there screaming, noise, noise, noise.
Exactly. Exactly.
Because when
It's
projects
the
fail,
truth.
that's what it sounds like.
It's exactly what happens, right? And what happens is if everyone gets enamored by a new technology, right? But they leave out the people process pieces that are fundamental. And this actually applies to AI as well. And we can go down that rabbit hole if you want. But I have seen the underutilization of many technology implementations where 30, 40, maybe 50% at best of the utility of a technology implementation where they're not getting the return on their investment simply because they put technology first and people processes be damned. Yeah, let's
Yep.
just jump in there, get the technology in there, and we'll figure out the rest. Instead of putting it the other way around and say, no, let's do an assessment. Let's see if the organization is ready for this change. Let's see what the change is going to look like. Create the right interfaces where we can go from the change, then to the transition. I come from the William Bridges, who is the grandfather of change management, by the way, in his initial certification that I got a long time ago, where we understood what change actually was and what the transition. He calls this what they call a neutral zone. And I've never forgot this fundamental thing that happens. You have an initial change, the change occurs, and then there's this neutral zone of the journey of navigating to get through the transition to get to the outcome on the other side. That in between is the sweet spot of ensuring that if you've got a very good plan in place, you can navigate that and create less noise on the other side. That's a very critical aspect for any successful technology implementation. SAP, whatever it is, it can be anything, any change in any organization. You can look at CEO transformations that are happening, transformation projects. The principles are always key, and the principles are the tools. Stunned silence. I love when I do that.
Man, that should be behind the paywall. That should not be a free piece of content right there.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I love talking about this, because it's one of those things where practitioners and people like me have built my own toolboxes over the years, why I'm successful, because I know what works, I know what doesn't work, right? But it's always around that fundamental framework. My foundation is always built on those three constructs. I always assess people, then I assess processes, and then I get to the technology. And a lot of times they will be bothered. Well, we have this technology. We have to blah, 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 blah. I'm like, yes. And what are your people and processes? If you don't do these first, you have high risk. I said, do you want to de-risk? And this is when they start thinking about, well, if we put the technology and think about the people processes later, here's the calculated risk that you're taking. Do you want to take that risk of creating a lot of noise in the system that's going to cost you? More noise equals more costs.
Now, you're talking about costs, and one thing I actually saw a post about this on LinkedIn recently, where a very well-known project manager posted about how he had to hire a consultant to hear the same things his team was telling him because he didn't listen to his team.
That's correct.
And what I commented on was, what about when you're the person in charge and you have to bring in a consultant to tell the team the same thing you've been saying, but hear it from somebody who's being paid as an outside professional?
Yeah, this is what they call the credibility gap. It's the cobbler kid's shoes. It's the ones that are next to you the closest and which you ignore because you're looking at the downward slope of what's happening in front of you. That's a leadership blind spot that
Mm-hmm.
needs to be called out because the old adage, and consultants always get blamed when something goes bad, and they never get credit when something goes good. So a really good consultant worth their salt knows how to disperse the credit so the client feels really good about themselves. Wow, look what we did. And the consultant fades in the background and you go, good job. I'm glad you thought of that.
Well,
I'm really, yeah,
that's what I said. That's what I say about project managers is everybody wonders what we do all day because the goal is not for me to get all the for me as the PM to get all the credit for everything that went right because we as a PM, oh, you build charts, you track budgets. We do a lot more than that. But what we don't, you don't see all the fires we're putting out behind the scenes because as I say, we make it look easy. And that's kind of what consultants do too in a lot of ways is they make
yes,
it look easy and then they're here, they're paid, poof, they're gone.
yes,
And then when the company that wasn't ready for those changes like you were talking about reverts back to the mean of what they were doing before because well, this is too hard. This isn't what I thought it would be. We don't have anyone holding our hands to make this work anymore. Then we blame the consultant didn't do anything. We're still
that's
back
right.
where we were.
Right.
But that's where that after work comes in and that's where the sustainment plans and all those things come in that aren't always followed.
That's right. And it's interesting too. And there's a very famous consulting group who will always remain nameless. I'm not going to name them. But I have actually made a living from following up in the wake of their project implementations to button up what they don't know what they were doing. And they were blamed for that because they had some after effects that they were just not good at. And it created opportunities for me to come in as an individual consultant and say, here are the cultural aspects they missed. Here are the processes they didn't thread through. And here's the underutilization of a technology implementation that should have been get to this percentage point, but has not because of the interfaces, blah, 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 blah. So again, I come back and I pull out my toolbox and I say, what are we building here? Is this, and there's some fundamentals, assessment phase, right? Making sure you have all your stakeholder analysis very crisp, fundamentals around change and transition. These are tried and true tools. There's some uniqueness in terms of the cultural aspects. I use MBTI organizational types, right? Myers-Briggs. You can
Hmm.
actually archetype the type of organizations that have certain personalities. Typically, it's usually at the foremost C-suite levels and permeates all the way through culturally. And they have a leadership style and a Myers-Briggs type of style that begins to give you the intelligence and how to navigate a personality type in an organization. Those are really good ways to understand how to talk to an organization in terms of what they're going to collectively understand, inculcate in that context, and then operationalize when it gets 18 inches down here.
Yeah. I mean, it really is a lot more than what we think. Like, I didn't even know OD was a thing until about a year or two ago.
Yeah.
And as I've been learning about it, I'm going, okay, well, this is 80% of what I do every day as a PM because our job is all those things and then some. And when you talk about change management and messaging, I'm reminded of a project I worked on where we were implementing a new project management software system, completely new to everybody in the PMO. Nobody wanted it, nobody cared. And the messaging around it was we're going to put some posters up and we're going to run some trainings.
Mm.
Would
Hmm.
you believe that? Would you believe that it was nobody used it other than the bare minimums of what they had to use?
Hmm. Yeah. I have learned that lesson as well. I and it's interesting too because this is where the cultural assessment in being genuinely human is going to come into effect. I made a big mistake. I was implementing a program at a Fortune 500 company in the insurance industry, and I built a phenomenal training program, all the bells and whistles, and nobody came. It was really interesting. It was abject failure if you were measuring attendance, effectiveness, change, utilization of the new processes, everything like that. But what I learned from that, and I said, you know what? Why isn't anyone not doing this? Because I didn't have the line authority to implement, and the leaders were reluctant to take it for themselves and lead from the front. And there were some, and it was too voluminous for them to take on because this was a side hustle in terms of the utility of the software. And we were too far down the road already. And I was coming in to do some cleanup, and it was just a really, I was trying to figure out how to get that done. And then when I started shifting towards this micro learning within the construct of ongoing meeting, operational meetings, and bringing bullet points of 5 to 10 minutes per agenda item on their operational calls over a period of time, I was able to deliver their training. And I figured out it wasn't so much the training, it was the voluminous time that they were trying to get it all and done in one spot. It's like, Eddie, I can't commit to that. Well, can you do 10 minutes on a training? Would you be able to do that during one of your ops call? Oh, you know what? I think we can do that. And all of a sudden we started getting momentum around that. Right. And so sometimes you got to figure stuff out in real time because, you do the hum and you go, oh crap, this is not working. So how do you shift yourself to figure it out and be able to press in and lean in and say, okay, that's not working. Why isn't it working? Can we assess it? And what else do we have to do to bring a solution to this problem quickly for the client? And those are the things that happen over the 25-year period I've been doing this.
And I'm going to go out on a limb here again and assume that you didn't start out being as great as you are now.
No, sir. No, sir.
So I actually want to, you're retired Army,
Mhm.
and I actually had to do, for one of my classes, I did a review of an article where they took, I think it was 100 years of combat stress research from the military and then equated it into a new OD principle theory. So, having spent over 20 years in the Army, what are some things you took with you from leading in there that you do in your everyday consulting work now?
Yeah, it's a great one. The first I said it originally, but task, condition, standard. When you're thinking through the linear process of the step processes. I was on a project one time, and the way I facilitate, I'm also a master facilitator too. That's one other of my toolboxes that I have, and I have a certification on that from the pharma company I worked at way back in the way back, and we had to map processes. And that always comes, and this is the military equivalent, but what does the task, condition, and standard look like on executing processes within the military? It always comes down to task, condition, standard. I applied that same principle, forged a very unique tool around that, and began working on this global project that had the entire conference room filled on all their step processes. Their step processes were built around the idea of very fragmented and a hodgepodge of crap that didn't really work. What it did is it exposed how effed up their processes really were. Now, why would you do task, condition, and standard? The standard is to keep peace. That's the quality piece. So when I brought that in, I began, this was a pharmaceutical manufacturing company. We figured out and we mapped, I mapped their manufacturing process and the customer segmentation at the beginning of the room, and it went all the way around the room, and all these fragmented processes, and then all the stakeholders who had to make decisions, and it exposed the inefficiency of the process. So when I think task, condition, standard, and I'm thinking about the lowest common denominator, and I'm thinking about that enlisted guy who's got those three things he's got to meet. What is the task? What is the condition? And what is the standard, which I got need to hit? It's the same thing when it comes to that customer support person who's doing the same thing. What are the step processes? And once you have that mapped and exposed, you can now deconstruct it, simplify it, because we all know that the most effective process is what I call another tool, and it's called simple elegance. It's really around how to get an outcome based on the simplicity of what you simplified. And what I mean by a simple elegance is a repeatable, scalable simplicity of a process that enables the scale over time. So that's kind of where my mind mapping happens and enabling a very specific military tool that I've forged over the years.
Yeah, that task condition standard one is one that stayed with me, and I use it almost daily for everything. Go figure, the Army actually got something right.
I know. Think about that for a second, right?
Yeah. So now is the time where I want to take a pause for a moment. And now, some words from our sponsors.
Projects slipping, teams misaligned, using the wrong tools? Introducing Spec C from Constructive Curiosity, the project execution software built by project managers. Spec C keeps your team aligned, your priorities clear, and progress moving. And right now, join the Spec C beta launch crew to get early access and help shape the future of project management. Sign up today at constructivecuriosity.com. Current PM software not coming through? It's time to see what Spec C can do for you.
And talk about the Patreon that I have. And that's how the audience can help support the show. There's two tiers. There's the $1 a month tier, which is low hanging fruit. And the purpose of that is just to help me keep the show going, support what I'm doing, upgrade equipment, pay for the services, all that fun stuff.
Yeah.
And then there's the $5 a month tier, which is the drinking the Kool-Aid. And that's where I haven't told you this yet, Eddie, but by agreeing to be here, you're also going to be a part of the postmortem interviews.
Okay, cool.
And that's a bonus interview where I'm going to be talking to Eddie, and we're going to be breaking down some of his expertise and knowledge in accountability and diving deeper into change management. And that's going to be picking his brain for some actionable information and actionable tips to make everybody else half as good as he is.
Well, you're very kind, and flattery will get you everywhere, brother. It's all good.
So with that, let's bring it back to the topic at hand. And I want to kind of have some fun with this because, you know, we spend so much time as professionals being so serious about everything. And I didn't really get any good prompts for you for good stories beforehand. So have to come up with some creative license. Then by all means.
You didn't. Hey, listen, you didn't pick up on the story I teed up for you. You didn't ask me for that one. How I got into OD.
Well, we weren't there yet.
Okay. We'll lead on.
See, so why don't you tell me how you got into OD work?
Yeah, so it was circuitously through HR as I became an HR manager. There I was, right? So you got to start off 4 stories the right way.
Well, we'll edit that out in post.
This is a family-friendly show.
It is.
It is, right? So here's where I am, right? So I was working corporate security for a huge pharmaceutical company back in the day, going to school at night, using my GI Bill, doing all that good stuff, right? As a good soldier, as a good veteran, being able to do that. And there I was, and in corporate security, I was a supervisor. I was doing all kinds of different things, manager, I was leading and running things and blah, 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 blah. The head of human resources called me in a panic, and the head of corporate security was not available for a very difficult termination. And this was going to blow up in her face, and she knew it because this person was very volatile, and there were all the right reasons why they were going to let her go. So she calls me. I got the call. It was the Hey You mission, right?
Mm-hmm.
He's not available. Usually when a CHRO like herself is going to have a very difficult turn at this senior executive level, you have the senior corporate security person in the room with you. That's just the way the protocols work. Typically, that's the way it works. It was a Hey You mission. He wasn't available. He was off campus. So it was me. I walk into the room. I get there quickly. I walk into the room, and it was a female scientist working on the other side and the CHRO on the other side. There I was, and it blew up immediately because the scientist realized that she was getting laid off, and she jumped up and started screaming. And the chief human resources officer, her eyes got big as saucers, and I'll never forget this. It was a knee-jerk reaction from me. I jumped up, but very calmly walked over to this person, stood in between them, and began talking to her in very soft tones. I began giving her the type of respect that I think she needed. And I began just saying, hey, listen, I hear you. This is really tough, and I understand. And I just began talking to her softly, the way she wanted to be treated. And then you can see her getting calmer, and calmer. And I put my arm around her, and I said, hey, listen, let's just walk out to the car. I know this is a tough shock to you. I picked up her coat. I put her coat on. I walked her all the way out to her car. She looked at me and says, "Thank you for treating me with respect." And she gave me a big hug. She got in her car and she left. The whole time this is happening, the chief of human resources is following me and watching the whole thing. And she's sitting there. And after I did all of that, she's looking at me with her mouth wide open. She goes, "How did you do that?" I said, "I don't really know, but I just knew she needed to be treated like that." 3 months later, after that, well, in between, here's what's happening. She started calling me for all her difficult terminations. And we developed a relationship. 3 months later, she offers me a position on her team. She says, "I really like your skills here. Would you ever consider joining my team as an HR manager?" And I started at the bottom, dude, and I had to learn everything. And I was happy to do it. I'll never forget the day I got the job description. I sat down with my wife. She read it. And she goes, "Eddie, this is you." And that's how I got into HR and talent management. And everything just took off from there. I knew this was going to be something I was going to doing for the rest of my life in one form or another and one way or another, but that's how it all happened.
Well, now you hit on a couple of things there that I want to pull on,
Yeah.
because as somebody who was laid off twice last year alone, and I've had contracts terminated through different contract roles that, they just weren't renewed, different things like that. And with all the layoffs going on around now, it's kind of, layoffs are so ubiquitous now, and we're talking about them like they're nothing. But I remember talking to a friend of mine. He worked for a IT company. He said he got a call, or he got an invite to a meeting with the HR person and somebody else. And he's like, "All right, I know what this is." The video ended, or the Zoom ended, and then his computer restarted and he was locked out.
Yes.
And they didn't tell him any of this was happening. And I understand why for a lot of things, but there's also that human element of, hey, I may have had something, a background on my computer that is a picture that I don't have anywhere else.
Yeah. It's a calculated risk, my friend, because they have to mitigate their risk in terms
Yep.
of the potential reactions. While that sucks and it's not a good way to handle things, the initial shock of that will wear off, and then they understand that they want to come back to you and pick up the pieces of the initial announcement. And typically, if there's packages involved in that, I can tell you one other story when I was deep into a huge reduction in force, and it drained me for like a week. I had to lay off 25 people individual. I had to have 25 conversations in one day. I went through 2 boxes of tissues. I went through grief and yelling and screaming and everything that you can imagine in the trenches. You get numb to it.
And you're shattering people's lives.
Absolutely, because their identities are wrapped up in their work. That's really important to understand. So you're playing with lives, and nothing more is being exacerbated now than AI and how it's really impacting everything we're doing. This is a place we've never been before, and we can certainly go down that rabbit hole. But the
Well,
dignity.
I think that's part two of this interview.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, I think that overall, one of the things that I want to hit on more is, I think, as we wrap up, is that human element isn't lost on people. Even if you do, it shouldn't be lost on people, regardless of which side of the conversation you're on.
Mm-hmm.
You just, as the person laying somebody off, you've got to have, for lack of a better term, you've got to have that strength of not tearing up and crying with someone while you're telling them their life is shattered, because the moment you show weakness is the moment they're thinking,
Well,
maybe there's a chance that he's not going to lay me off.
there has to be a degree of empathy.
Yes.
And it's really difficult to measure where that is in the moment. It's not an easy thing. It's extraordinarily difficult, nor should it be easy at all, right? Because you're playing with people's lives and livelihood.
And it's even harder when you're doing it virtually.
Yes, very much so.
So, with that deep, heartfelt, emotional discussion, let's move it on to a little bit lighter.
Sure.
And this is where I give you my personalized question that I came up with just for you.
Oh, gosh. All right. Well, okay. Hit me with it.
So, if your company, we'll go with, actually, we'll use this one. What's the most ridiculous unwritten rule that everybody followed and you discovered it in an organization and you're just sitting there going, why does this exist? And I don't want it to be like one of those, it's ridiculous in the fact that it made no sense to any other thing other than they had it. Like you couldn't wear brown socks on Wednesday.
Yeah, I don't know if I can be funny in that in the context of a story, but I do know fundamentally when I've been on a lot of different things, it's the cultural shift that are the art of OD that never really occurs well enough in real time. And there is some typology that's built around that. But it's always that adage where, well, this is the way we've always done it.
Yep.
And that is what you fight against. It's a status quo mindset that ultimately you're trying to move away from, right? And a lot of people, a lot of status quo thinkers, and it's very prevalent in the military space. And we can certainly talk about that. But for one instance, is that everyone believes, and I am in a very minority view, by the way, when it comes to this, that everything should be free for veterans. I don't
No.
believe it, simply because that I'm seeing a lot of undercurrent of an entitlement mentality that just bothers the crap out of me. Right. And I can spot that entitlement mentality in a heartbeat because they think that everything, well, I just assume it's free. Well, yes, to a certain degree. And I believe that we should honor their sacrifice, not their service, but their sacrifice in the context of in their initial move out of the military. Yeah, maybe you get this one, but post service, it's just like a Netflix subscription or something like you need to pay your own way forward so you can see the value of that. So that's one area. I'm not sure I can tell you a funny story around that, but that status quo thinking from a cultural perspective is what you ultimately fight against in OD and why a lot of projects fail because they cannot configure the cultural aspect. I can't remember the author's name, but it's another great fundamental book I've built over or that I've used over the years. It's called it's the Rider and the Elephant analogy, right? And the rider controls a very small person controls the elephant, and the elephant is the status quo thinking that never changes, right? If I find it, there's also the spider and I'll remember this. I'll remember another book that I use fundamentally, but I'll as soon as if I can remember it, I'll tell you that just kind of this change transition fundamentals around that and the cultural aspect you need to drive towards. But I'm not really sure that's what you needed here. So tell me if I stuck the landing on that.
Oh, you did great. I mean, it really isn't something that is, I mean, normally I get a lot of absurd answers like I said, the no brown socks on Wednesday for different things, but
Yep.
hey, the way we've always done it is a perfect answer for a military man.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and I was
It's
going to say,
super important that people understand status quo thinking, right?
yeah.
And that status quo thinking is the hardest to overcome in OD work. It is the number one thing. To try to move the cultural shift here is the most important thing. And that's why the stakeholder analysis is critically important. When you communicate to a C-suite, is not the same as to the operation folks. It's
Yeah.
totally different comms altogether, right? And it's timing as well. Great content, great messages at the great time, at the right audience, at the right time in the moment, and a just-in-time mentality that allows them to digest and get it here. Everyone understands this is the easy entry piece, right? It can get into your mind very easily, but it's got to work its way down. And this is where the elephant and the rider come in. This is the elephant, but the mind is the rider, but the elephant, right, is the person who is saying, hey, I'm going to put up all the resistance in the world and it's never going to get done. So, yeah.
So now I'm going to hand the floor over to you and let you talk about all the things you've got going on and where the audience can find you and connect with you.
Well, thank you, Trevor. I certainly appreciate that, but I can talk all day on this. How much time do I have?
Why don't you give us the highlights?
I'll give you the highlights. I'll hit the wave tops, as I'm fond of saying, right? So I've got a lot of different things going on, significant work, right? I'm bringing a lot of different things to measure. One of the things that we're really looking at is bringing a system solution, right? And this is the way I couch it, right? Because you and I both know, I don't know if you've ever done any kitchen renovation. Have you ever done any kitchen renovation on your own?
No, but I did do a bathroom.
So it's very similar. So you look at something that needs to be fixed or repaired. All of a sudden you change something out and you look at it and you say, well, that looks really good. Like you replace the kitchen sink, for example.
Hmm.
But you look at the backsplash area and you go, yeah, you know what? The backsplash area doesn't match the sink. So you get the backsplash area done. And then you look at the countertops, you go, you know what? I don't think the counters really match that. All of a sudden you replace the countertops. And then you look at the floor and you look at the cabinets, you go, you know what? Nothing. And all of a sudden you have a completely redone kitchen because
You
you
just need a
understand
new sink.
because you needed a new sink. So why am I saying all this? Well, because when you look at the military transition, for example, when you think of military to civilian transition, there is the F word. I'm going to drop the F word here. It's called fragmentation. You don't have to take me out of that one, right?
I had my finger on the button.
But fragmentation is the new F word when it comes to our community. Now, what do I mean by that? You and I both know that a service member will listen to their buddy, go out there, run, get their resume thinking, and worship the resume gods, thinking that this is their ticket to get a job. Then they realize that, well, it's not just the resume, it's networking. And then they realize that maybe it's not just about networking and resumes. Maybe it's because I have to learn how to interview better. Maybe it's not about those three things, but because I don't have my headspace right and I have to learn how to be a civilian again. And that's the wellness factor. So what happens is you have an internal reorganization that's occurring in real time inside your head and your heart in terms of the total wellness of how you begin to come back to the military by learning how to renovate what's in here, but more importantly, what's in here. And that requires a whole of nation system solution. How many times have you heard a service member turn over in their job multiple times and just job hop or actually fall through their cracks, go dark on us and end up killing themselves, or something gets really messed up in their family and the family breaks down? You and I know that that's happening at an alarming rate, right? But
Hmm.
no one stops to think about what the whole of nation systems problem is. It's a whole of nation systems problem. Now, remember what I said about the status quo thinkers, right? Well, Eddie, the transition works. I got a good job. Okay, great.
I didn't.
Yes.
I'm famous for telling people I got out of the army as
Hmm.
an E6 with an MBA, and my
Mhm.
first job was working $8 an hour telling athletes to shut up in the Auburn Student Athlete Library
Yes. And
because there
that
was
is,
so much I didn't know when I just assumed everyone's going to want me.
that's right. And that is wonderfully naive and a lack of strategic understanding of what you're putting yourself into. You do not understand the battlefield in terms of what you're going into because it requires a different mindset, but also requires a different heart knowledge of where you really want to be. So, what I've done over the years is I've built the fundamental construct from the OD side of me in a systems thinking way, because I'm a systems thinker, right? OD guy. How do we understand what the true problem is? There is a whole of nation systems problem because of that F word, because of the fragmentation. Think of it as a fragmented monster that we're all on these puzzle pieces on, and we're trying to figure it out and put our own plans together. And too many of our brothers and sisters are falling through the cracks. It's a huge problem. And once you're able to see this from an OD perspective, from a system thinking perspective, and you look at it and you say, you know what? It is a whole of nation systems problem. This requires a whole of nation system solution. And that's the beauty of being able to partner together because quite honestly, with 45, 50,000 VSOs out there, multiple billions of dollars, everybody thinks this problem is solved and everybody has moved on. But we know in our tribe that that's not the case.
And I'll highlight that it's not just a veteran problem. It's across the board. It's just highlighted in the vet community more than other
It's
places.
amplified. Yes. Yes. It's a cultural rot that's going on because of neglect, right? And this is the reason why I said this earlier in the podcast. I said, I'm not worried about service as I'm worried about honoring the sacrifice that you and I have gone through. It's about honoring the sacrifice and why this nation needs to pivot and swear an oath to this community that honors that sacrifice the right way. And here's the fundamental construct I want you to just think about and marinate on. And this can be for anybody. You'll notice what it takes to build a warrior, right? When you think about the warrior ethos, we have multiple trillions of dollars we invested to create the greatest warriors probably on the face of the earth for all time. Would you believe that that's fundamentally true?
I would.
I want you to stop and think about this. Okay, clarity, right? Black and white. We know how to build warriors. How come we have not invested in the same type of way to help them come back to civilian life in such a way that honors their sacrifice?
Well, and I think that goes, because I know that there are people listening across the globe, and I don't think it's just a U.S. problem.
No, it's a multiple, yes, totally agree. But I want to come back to the fundamental question. Why isn't there? I'm going to ask you a very fundamental question. I'm going to actually poke you in the chest a little bit. These are not rhetorical questions. I need you to answer this for me. And I'm going to give you one rabbit hole that maybe for another podcast, another time. I'm going to ask you and I'm going to tell you a story behind it too, because it's important to understand what I'm about to say. What is the standard in transition excellence for the military?
Well, I would say that the military standard is to get the blocks checked and make sure that we do what we say we're going to do to deliver the service member out in the civilian world.
Really? Say more about that.
That you have your program, you've got your list of things you've got to do. It's just like any other thing that the military does. You get your list of classes you've got to go to, you attend those classes, you get your sign off, you're good to go.
Is that a standard? Is that a standard?
Well, it is a standard in the aspect that you have to complete a certain number of classes and complete certain blocks of instruction. The quality of them is relative. The buy-in is relative. The paying attention is relative. There's no follow-up to completion to make sure that the service member takes what they want from it.
Mm-hmm. The answer is there isn't a standard. Think about it. I'm gonna push back a little bit and say, if I were to say to you, I need you to build a Navy SEAL for me in 5 days. You only have 5 days to do it. Could you do it? So why do we think we could send someone to a transition assistance program class and think we can build a civilian in 5 days?
That's probably the $1 billion question, not even million.
Correct. So there are a number of rabbit holes that would suggest that something is not right. When you step back and do the assessment, right? Remember, an OD systems thinking guy, I began to look at all the multiple data points, and I've begun to construct that. Think about this. When you think about America's Warrior Partnership and the data collection they actually did, and if this is true, this is extraordinarily bad for our community. Everyone talks and quotes 22 suicides a day, right? But they've been able to collect data on the suicide plus the self-injury piece that has created a data piece, if true, has a huge implication. And they've been able to collect data that suggests that the actual death rate of veterans per day, to include suicide and self-harm, is between 42 and 45 a day. Now think about that. If you were, since post 9/11, were to multiply that out over the course of the 20 plus years, that comes out to 368,000 deaths, when there's been 7,000 total combat deaths in both campaigns with Iraq and Afghanistan. If that's true, just that one data point alone should blow people's minds that the system is not only broken, it's not only fragmented, but it's ultimately broken. With too many of our brothers and sisters are falling through the cracks. So just that one data point alone, the impact of the mental wellness that's not happening, the underemployment that you experienced. When you start looking at all the data across the board and you step back and look at the bigger picture with all those data points, you begin to realize that there's something very wrong about the way we're bringing bringing our warriors out of the military. And that's where civilian ready comes in. And this is where it comes into this aspect. I've spent the last 5 years building something pretty extraordinary, right? So this is my other foundation work that I'm partnering on. We have a reboot camp that has 8 dimensions to get to 5 outcomes. When I mentioned before about the standard in transition excellence, I've created the first one in US history. And it's based on these 5 outcomes: to be culturally adapted, socially integrated, vocationally aligned, with the ability to articulate your value as a first choice premium talent, distinction there. And the 5th one, more importantly, the most important one, is the ability to obtain your new civilian identity and your new civilian destiny of purpose, passion, and impact. That is the baseline of how we built this reboot program. But it's even more important that when they transition with that foundation, they have a quality of life that enables them to thrive post-military service. And that's a whole nother podcast altogether in the context of what that should look like. But the reason why I'm going to tell you this story is because I asked that same question to a very prominent person who will remain anonymous. And I asked him the same question, and he started down the same road you did. I said, let me save you a couple of steps on that one. There isn't a standard. I said, you're going to tell me that is this checklist and going through TAP and doing all these things is the standard? Really? Is that a good standard? It may be an implied standard, but it's not the standard. You and I both know I wore the diamond in my career, so I know what standards look like. I know what a quality standard looks like. We know the task condition standard to get to that place. This does not exist. And once you see this, brother, you cannot unsee it.
Well, I know that, you're being very generous with your time. So I want to kind of wrap it up here.
Yeah, please.
And let the audience know where they can find you and find out more
LinkedIn
about what you're up to.
Yeah, LinkedIn. Get me on LinkedIn first, right? Because that's the way to get me. You can get me on Civilian Ready website, but that's where you can get me the most. LinkedIn primarily.
And I'll have links to all those in the show notes.
Absolutely.
All right. So, Eddie, you've been so gracious with your time and your knowledge. I'll end the show like I always do. May all your deliverables be on time, your budget's in the black, and your scope not creeping. For Eddie Dunn, I'm still Trevor, and I'm still the disgruntled PM. Thanks for listening.